Just to confirm, this is the Data Modules Workshop. We're going to be going through some examples of what you can do with data modules and provide some hands-on access to a training server. Did they distribute the URL for the server as part of the pre-work or no? Yes, okay. It's on the sheet, great. Standard disclaimer, there may be things said during this that refer to maybe features that are in the data modules roadmap that obviously, you gotta understand that if I say, yeah, IBM's gonna be adding X, Y, or Z to data modules in the future, that's not a guarantee that they're gonna do it. It's all subject to revision going forward. As I'm going through all of this, feel free to ask me any questions you have at any point. We're gonna try to keep this kind of, I don't wanna say loose, but we'll have as much fun as the subject allows here. So who am I? I know a ton of people in the room, which is always good. Every year at Bacon, I know more and more people, which indicates that we must be doing something okay because y'all keep coming back. My name is Ryan Dahle. I'm a senior solution architect and product manager with PM Square. I'm also, I was selected as a IBM champion for 2019, which Dustin always makes fun of me that that I pointed out at every possible opportunity, so I had to make sure to point it out again here for y'all. I also have a blog, IBMBlueView.com. I mostly cover Cognos stuff. Some of you may have been there at some point in the past. There's a lot of content that I've published in the last couple of weeks related to data modules, not so much technically how to do X, Y, or Z, or how to use any particular feature, but more related to how to think about them, how to deploy them in your Cognos environment. Can you use them for single source of the truth style reporting, or do you have to use Framework Manager for that? So if you're interested in any of those topics, feel free to check out the blog. So the agenda, just to set some expectations for how we're going to do this, because I did for those of you who attended Bacon last year and went to the data modules presentation, we kind of switched it up a little bit this year to try a different approach so that you would get access to more content. So Sonia and I spent a good bit of time over the last couple weeks taking our full-blown paid data modules course and condensing it down into something that we could present in a couple hours. So as we go through this, we're going to cover the types of features that you see on this screen here. We're going to create a data module off of an Excel file that we've already uploaded into the environment. We'll use some of the data cleansing and formatting features of data modules, add calculations, add in some filters. Then we're going to bring in some tables from a SQL Server database. It's our trusty old GoSales database that I'm sure we all know and love. Join those to the Excel spreadsheet, do some of the custom sorting options that are available in data modules, and then add in relative time and table views. And those last two pieces, I think, are really key to understanding what data modules offer that go above and beyond what's available in Framework Manager today, and two of the features that hopefully, after you get some hands-on experience with them, will be compelling enough for you, if you're not using data modules today, to consider how you can integrate them into your BI practice in the future. Out of curiosity, a show of hands, who all in here has made a data module at all? Okay, so a good portion of the room. Now, who all in here has made a data module that actually went into production? Yeah, so it's about a third of the people who have explored the feature at all have actually carried it forward into a production environment. And that's, if you're one of those people who has played with it and haven't brought it forward into production, that's not at all unusual. That's the case with a lot of my customers. Particularly if you tried data modules for the first time, maybe at release 11.0.6, and after about 7 minutes, you did everything there was to do, and you said, okay, well, that was cute, but it doesn't have any of the functionality I need, so I'm going to keep using Framework Manager. You will find as we go through this that they really have closed a lot of the gaps with Framework Manager and have gone beyond it in a couple key ways. The second point I want to make about how we're going to handle this is rather than having me go through each of these sections step by step and then you guys repeat it and then I go through the next section step by step. I'm going to take the first 15 minutes or so and show you how to do all of this. And then we're going to proceed kind of, you have the instructions in front of you, so you can proceed through the exercises at your own pace. And I will be available, and Sonia and Randy in the back, to help with any questions that you have. The reason that we decided to do it that way is because when I said that Sonia and I tried to condense it down to something that could be presented in 2 hours, I think we succeeded into condensing it down into something that can be presented in 4 hours, and we don't have 4 hours. In order to give you the ability to do as much of the content as possible while you're here, and then, of course, go back to your place of work and continue there if you're interested, we're going to take that approach this year. Now, what I will do is when people have questions that I think we should demonstrate, I can come up here and I will demonstrate whatever feature or answer any question live. And those of you who are interested, of course, can follow along. And those of you who are so absorbed in the awesomeness that our 11.1 data module is that you don't even notice I'm up here presenting, can just carry on that path. Okay. So, clear off this space here a little bit. So like I said, I'm going to go through, and I'm not going to do the exact steps that you see in that packet, because that would be dull, right? I'm going to do a little improvisation up here for you. Has anybody connected to the training network yet? Or the training server? Okay. One thing you'll notice when you connect to it, once you have internet, is that it's not going to ask you to log in, right? So you'll notice you're probably accustomed to saving stuff in your My folders when you do Cognos training exercises. We turned on anonymous access, so you're not going to have a My folders. So we created a place in the environment for you to save all of your stuff. Just don't be surprised if you try to save to My folders or use them and it throws an error message. It's not that there's something wrong with the environment, it's just that you're connecting anonymously. Okay, so you will find this GoSales report.xlsx. That's what we're going to start from as we do these exercises. So I'm going to go ahead and you can open a data module by doing new data module, or if you have something like an Excel file or a package or another data module even, you can click on the More button and then choose Create Data Module, and that will open the data module interface as well. So like everything in Cognos, you know, there's multiple roads to get to your destination. When I pop this open, you'll see that it has the name XLSX, but in all other ways, this is going to act exactly the same as if I had connected to a SQL Server database, with the exception of, you know, obviously I can't pass if I'm writing, say, some custom SQL or a calculation. I can't pass a SQL Server, like a SQL Server function to an Excel file. That's not going to work, right? But otherwise, it's going to act exactly the same as any other table that you would have anywhere else. So some of the things that we can do in here that it's important to explore. The first one, if you click on the grid view, and then click on a table, you'll see that it's going to give you a preview of the data. Now, if we take a look at this data right away, the first thing I'm going to notice, and you know this sometimes happens, especially if you're pulling information out of operational systems, is all of my products are prefixed with the word product and then an underscore, right? Now, obviously, we don't want to present that to our end users, so the first thing we might want to do is try to clean that up. And if I look at the product field, you'll see when I click on the More button that I'm going to have the ability to clean. That brings up the clean screen, which has a number of options for handling what you can do. Now, what options you're going to have here are going to depend on the data type of the column that you're interacting with. So if this is a text type, I have different options than if it were a numeric type, for example. In this case, I want to tell it to return a substring of characters, and we're going to say return starting at 9. So at position, it'll trim off all of the characters up to position 9. Sorry, what was the question? Yeah, so if you click on the 3 dots next to product and then choose clean. Everybody able to do that? Okay. Is anybody having any challenges, servers not up, can't connect, anything like that right now? Okay, good. So here it gives you this preview to say, kind of show you what it is that you're doing. In this case, we're going to trim off the first 9 characters. And you click the clean button, and you'll notice it automatically updates the grid view, so you can instantly see the results of whatever it is that you're doing in data modules, which is one of the things I like most about them. So now we can see that prefix is gone, and the data is more presentable for our end users. The second thing we might want to do in here has to do with the functionality called split. So it's very common, especially when you're working with Excel data, that you're going to have, it's just going to have a date, and you're going to want year and month and all of that sort of stuff, right? Day of week even. Cognos now in data modules makes that very easy to do, where you can click on where you see date and then choose split. And this is another one of those instances where, and this is what you're going to see in Cognos, I think. This is a design decision they've made where when you click on a menu, you open a menu, you're only going to see the options that apply to the data type for the item you're interacting with, right? So Cognos knows that I'm doing the split functionality on time, and so it gives me the time options. It doesn't give me the string options. If I were to try split on a string, it would give me a set of options that were appropriate for, say, splitting first name and last name from one another, right? And so you can just expect that. That's kind of the design language they're using, both in data modules and in the other features. I think those of us who've been doing Cognos for a long time are used to, when I open a menu, I see every option, even if it doesn't at all apply to what it is I'm attempting to do. They're trying to pare that back a little bit so that you're only ever seeing the things that make sense based on what you're interacting with. So in this case, I can choose, well, I want year, month, and day. And maybe we'll include day of week, so I can see what the day of week is. I'll say next. Now I can rename any of these, which you'll presumably, if you have multiple date types in here that you're doing this to, you'll of course want to rename them so that it's specific as to which year you're talking about. Is it order year? Yes. Yeah, so I haven't tried that. Yeah. 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 I haven't tried it either, but yeah. So you see when I click OK, it automatically generates year, month, day, and day of week. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a great question. A couple points on that. The question was, if I have to change the data format, can I do that here, or do I have to go back into Excel? So the first thing I would say is, as of the 11.1.3 release, it will pick up the data format from Excel. It didn't do that in the past. So you'd upload an Excel file, and you'd be looking at the data format in here and comparing it to what was in Excel, and it often wouldn't match up. Like Cognos had just gotten it wrong, and there's no obvious way to change it. Now, what you can do in here is you can use the cast function to change data types, right? There's no like button where you could say, hey, I want to change the, well, that's the data type really, right? If you want to change the format of the data, you can do that in here. So they have brought in here you can see if I click on date and then I have format data, they've made this much more like what you had in Framework Manager. So in previous releases, like if you're on any of the 11.0 versions, there's not much you can do as far as changing format. You have to write calculations to do it. Now you can see that I can come in here and say, you know, this is type date, and I want to use such and such a date separator, and I want to use a particular style exactly like you would in FM. And then, you know, if it's misidentified something and it's calling it you know, it's a numeric and it's got it as a varchar, you can use the cast function to change that. I have asked IBM to just give us a drop down that will apply the cast function. Don't make people learn how to do that, but we'll see. That's a great question though. So you can see and you can do multiple items at once. So for example, if I take unit cost, these are all dollar types. So if I shift click and highlight them all, then I can go into the format data, and I'm going to change all of these to currency and tell it that they are all US dollars. I click OK, and you can see it's updated how the data is presented by putting the dollar symbol and automatically applying the 2 decimal point to it. So that's another example of, you know, if you're on 11.0, you probably know that like you basically have to turn your numeric field into a string in order to append a dollar sign to it, but then Cognos is going to treat it like a string, so you have all sorts of problems, right? Whereas here you can just easily reformat it. Now, we've done a little bit of cleansing of the data. We've gotten it in a slightly better shape to present to end users. Now we might want to start to do some calculations. So if we look at this data, and you'll find this in the examples, we don't have, you know, we've got quantity and we've got unit sale price, but we don't actually have like a revenue column, for example. So how would I make that? Well, the easiest way to do it is if I control-click the 2 columns and then click on I think did they still call that the More button, Sonia? Yeah. At one point it was definitely called the More button, but if you click the More button, you'll see Create Calculation. Now you can say, I want to multiply quantity by unit sale price. I want to call that revenue. They recently added this calculate after aggregation. That was something that was missing in data modules, was the ability to decide when it calculated before or after aggregation was applied. So that's pretty handy. I click OK. Now you'll notice it added revenue up at the top. It just automatically adds new columns that you make to the top, which I personally find kind of irritating, but it's easy to reorder them. You can just click and drag. And now you can see our revenue column that we have here. Now it doesn't have a format applied to it. So if we want it to be in US dollars, we can go through the formatting exercise to format it into US dollars. For the sake of time, I'm just going to skip that right now. There is a more complex calculation and expression editor that I don't think we cover as part of the exercises, but is covered in the full training. Just to show you all what that looks like. If I do new calculation, you'll see it brings up this expression editor. This expression editor is, in my mind, like light years better than any of the other expression editors in Cognos. Way better than the one that was in the 11.0 data modules, but also better than the one that's in report authoring. So this has features like prettify, for example. If you're typing something in here, you can hit the prettify button and it'll automatically put line breaks in your code where they make sense so it's easier to read. You can change the font size. You can put it into a high contrast mode for people who are visually impaired. It gives you can preview just snippets of the code. So if you're writing a nested case statement and you highlight just the innermost case statement and hit test, it will run just that case statement, not the whole thing, right? So much more feature-rich compared to what you have in other places. I have suggested to IBM that they need to add this. Just take the one out of report authoring and put this one in. You don't lose anything that I'm aware of in this versus the one in report authoring. We'll see. Now you can also do filters in here. There's kind of two kinds of filters, just like you have in FM. You can filter a table, or you can make a drag and drop filter object. In order to make a drag and drop filter object, I would click on the table and say new filter. And here I might say, give it a name. Trying to remember the name of one of the product lines in here. Bug Shield, yeah. You think that would be burned into my memory at this point. And I can say product equals Bug Shield. Okay. And you can see that filter object. It works exactly like the type of filter object you would build in FM. So when end users interact with this data module, they will see that. They can drag and drop it onto a visualization, and it will automatically filter that visualization for only product type equal to Bug Shield. One important thing to keep in mind when you're working in here is that what you see here is exactly what the end users are going to see when they interact with the data module in any of the authoring interfaces. So you don't have to switch back and forth. The only exception will be you can hide items in here. And if you do that, then of course the end user won't see it, but when you're in here, you will see it. If I wanted to filter this whole table, I could go into the properties, and here you can see in the properties there's a filters tab. And then from the filters tab, it's as easy as, say, selecting a column like, maybe I wanted to only filter for a particular year. Say I want to filter this data module to only contain data for 2018. I could go ahead and say OK, and you'll notice it puts the filter icon next to the table and the field which has been filtered. Yeah, so what you would do is you would essentially, if you were in one of the authoring interfaces, the question was how do you actually apply that Bug Shield filter that you created? And what you would do, I think I have one saved in here. Yeah, it needs to be in, yeah. Okay. What you would essentially do, for the sake of time, I'll just describe it. And then maybe I can show you later. Basically, if I'm in one of the authoring interfaces, let's just imagine that I'm in dashboards, and here's my dashboard canvas, and I have a line chart. And I want to filter that line chart to just include the Bug Shield product. I would just grab this and then drag and drop onto the line chart, and it would apply the filter. Yeah. So some, but not all, right? Like I don't believe you can do like parameter maps in here. You can define params in data modules. Now, it's not, if you go to the IBM documentation, it doesn't tell you anything about it, but if I were to make a calculation that contains a question mark param question mark, it will be treated like a param when I'm using report authoring or dashboards. It's quite clear when you do that they haven't entirely built that capability out. So, your mileage may vary, but you can define a parameter in here, and it will be treated like a parameter in those interfaces. Yeah, so all of the Cognos functions and everything are available. Yeah, they weren't for a long time. I find a lot of times when I show these to, especially to people who maybe tried them 2 years ago and then didn't like them for good reason and never used them again, that they're kind of surprised by what all is in here now. Now, up to this point, we've just been working on this Excel sheet. Now, if we want to go ahead and add in some additional data, I can go ahead and click the Add Source table, right? And click the plus button here to add a new source, and it will say, well, do you want to add a new source or do you want to add more tables? In this case, we're going to add a new source. From here, you can go ahead and add one of the things, one of the data sources that are available to flow into data modules. So what are those, right? It's Excel spreadsheets, it's Cognos data sets, Framework Manager packages, SQL Server or databases, and other data modules. That covers them all, right? So data modules, you can have a data module flow into another data module, which is not something that we're going to cover over the course of these exercises, but it's very useful. And if you go to my blog, I have an article about how to use that. That would probably be pretty interesting. I like to think it's pretty interesting. You let me know. So I'm going to add, of course, our trusty Go sales. I'll say, OK. Now it's going to say, well, do you want to pick the tables, or do you want me to discover tables? What that means is you can type in a phrase like, I'm looking for sales and time data for products. And Cognos will interpret that, go through the database, and find the tables that it thinks relates to the phrase that you typed in. What was the question? So what it does, when you first connect to a database, by default, it will do some data profiling of the database where it fetches the first 1,000 rows from each table and then evaluates what's in, like the actual data that's in there along with the column names to try to assign like ontological categories to the fields. So it goes through and it looks for anything that looks like money, that has a column header that seems like money, and it would assign the category of like revenue to that so that if any user came in here and typed in revenue, it might pull one of those fields, is how it does it. In this case, I'm just going to select some tables. You can see all the tables in the database, and you can preview the data that's available in them. Where's the product name? Product number. What should we grab here? What do I have in this? Product number, product. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to add my source, Great Outdoor Sales, grab some of the product tables, and put them in here. And you will see how it is very easy. I'll just grab these two to start combining these. So if I look at my relationship diagram, here's my 3 tables. And like I said, it's not going to treat these other tables any differently than that Excel file. So if I want to go ahead and add a relationship, it's really kind of as simple as, if I control-click the 2 tables over here, and then right-click on them. Come on now. There we go. And choose New Relationship. Now I can join these together. So in this case, the Excel file is really functioning as my fact. I've brought in a dimension table, and I can go ahead and join, product onto. We don't have the product in there. Let's join these guys. Product number, product. Yeah, we should be able to join through there. What am I not seeing? Sometimes you do this so much that you can't even see it anymore. Yeah, well, if I look in table 1, am I crazy? Thank you. I think there's actually a step for this in your. So if you look at product number, it's marked as a measure. That's why it's not letting me join. So if I go in here and change it to an identifier, suddenly, remember how I said Cognos won't let, it takes away options that it doesn't think are appropriate? Sometimes that comes back to haunt you, like when you're doing a presentation and you can't do a join because it's identified it as a measure. So I change it to an identifier, and now I will be able to execute this join by I'll choose new relationship. You can actually, you don't have to control-click the 2 tables. If you click on an individual table and say, I want a relationship, it'll provide this drop-down for you to select any other table that may be available in there. And so if I go in here and I choose product number, now that I have that, click Match Selected Columns. When you click Match Selected Columns, it is going to actually merge the 2 tables together in this preview pane. So you can actually see what does this join look like based on how I've defined it. And this is how I often find, if I've done a funky join, I can identify things like double counting and that sort of stuff just by looking at this window, which is pretty handy. It allows you to identify that sort of error earlier on in the process compared to if you were using Framework Manager, for example. Now, of course, I can change this, do my inners, my outers, my cardinality, and also some join optimization, which we won't really cover today, but is handy if you're joining, say, 2 tables together from different databases. Choose OK. Now you can see that I have got my join there, right? Now I want product line information. I don't have product line information on the product table, but I do have it here on the product line table, so I could go ahead and do the same thing. Join product and product line. Yeah, of course, there is no product line on here. It's just product type. But whatever. We'll show you that Cognos is happy to let you make a bad join. Right? So if I were to match 2 columns that don't, where it doesn't, it says no data available. Right? Now I can go ahead and click OK. And it's going to have that join in there. But of course, that join's not going to give us any information. Go ahead. Yeah, really, not really. You can sort of see it if you go into, see what it looks like. Yeah. Essentially, yeah. Yeah. A couple, I'll just, yeah.
Along with that, so the question was, can you see the SQL that sits behind a join? Oftentimes that's because you have a complex join.
Yeah.
So is there an expression editor in there to do a compound or a complex join?
No, not for the joins. Yeah, they don't have an expression editor for the joins. Yep. Now what you can do, there's 2 more features I'll show, and then we'll start the exercises. What you can do is, like in this case, I've got product and product line. Now maybe I want to present that to my end users, not as 2 separate tables, but as 1 table, right? What you can do, if you click on the data module, you'll see you now have the capability to add a new table or to add a new table using SQL. So this is something that was missing from earlier releases that caused a lot of people to not use data modules is, I can't just build a table with SQL. Well, now you can. You could create a table by writing SQL. I won't go through that here, but you can do it. The other thing you can do, I will say I want to create a table. And I'm going to choose product and product line. And again, because I have that funky join there, we might get some goofy stuff. But here you can see I can create what's called a view of tables. I'll choose that. and then choose Next. At this point, I can pick which fields I want to include in my view of tables. So since we're trying to make this easier for end users to consume, maybe I just want, from this table, I want the product number and the product type code and the product brand code. And from the product line table, I want just the product line in English. Now, when I click refresh, of course, I'm going to get no data because I made that bad join, right? But at this point, I give it a name. Maybe we just call this product. Products. Click finish. Now I have a new table here that is a composite of those two underlying tables. And at this point, because I'm trying to improve the user experience, I could control click these two tables, product and product line, and choose hide from users. Now when the users interact with this data module, what they will see is the Go Sales fact and the products view table that I built. They will not see the underlying tables. I use this all the time now, both for improving the presentation of things and also for greatly simplifying my modeling, because this is going to act like a totally independent table, right? I could get rid of the join between products and between product, right? Remove that join and now join the view table to my fact. This is the way to do it. Yep. If you have to fake a conformed dimension, this is how you do it. I also build facts this way all the time. I think in your exercises, did they use the order header? Did we include that? Yeah. So oftentimes, imagine an example. You have an order header table and an order details table. Very common, right? And you want to make like a sales fact out of that. This is what you would do. You would join the two together and then build a view that combines order header and order detail information into one table, and then present that as your fact. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is as close as you're going to get. Yeah, this is basically a model query subject. Now, the shortcuts and links, the way that works, actually, I wrote a blog post last week about it, exactly about alias shortcuts and whether or not you can do them in data modules. So just to give you like the 2-minute version, kind of, this view will inherit, it will not, so an alias shortcut or a shortcut, the idea behind it is essentially it's a pointer, right? So any changes you make to table A will automatically flow through to the shortcut. I add new fields, I change field names, right? That's not quite how these views are going to work. Any logic changes you make, I have a calculation, I change the calc logic, that will automatically flow through to this view. What will not automatically flow through is I added 2 new fields. That won't automatically flow through. Or I changed the name of a field. That will not automatically flow through. So what you really need to do, and it's unfortunate, but it works, is you simply come in here and choose Edit Table View, and then, if you're just trying to inherit, like you make a few simple changes here, say you added a few columns, you want them to appear in the view, you would come in here, edit the view definition, choose OK, and then it will update. So it's not automatic. It's not like it's the hardest thing in the world to do. Now, in situations where in the past you had dozens or hundreds of alias shortcuts, you don't want to be coming in here and making dozens or hundreds of manual edits. And I cover in my blog post how to use 2 data modules to kind of fake alias shortcuts. It's a little more in depth than what we can cover in the course of what we have here, but if you're interested, I'll show you later. The only other thing I'll show here, and then I think we're going to take a brief pause, and then we'll start to go through the exercises, is the relative time functionality that's available. So I'm going to go to Add Sources, Add New Sources. In the team content, you will find calendars, and then in there, say fiscal calendar, and then choose OK. Now you'll see it added a new table in here. The table has a little link, and it's kind of got a turquoise. It's turquoise instead of black, right? That means that it's actually a table from another data module. And in this case, any changes that were made to this data module would automatically flow through here, right? So this is called I think they call it a module link or a table link or link table or something like that. But this is essentially how you would do that, is you import the table from another data module, and then any change I make to that base data module does flow through to this. Now, to do the relative time, if I click on date, you can see when I go into the properties of this date column that I have this lookup reference. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to fiscal calendar. And that's it. And now you can see all of my relative date filters. So if you think about how much time it would take you to build all of these as calculations in Framework Manager, I mean, if this is going to take you 6 months to get good at Cognos to even know how to build these types of relative time things, then you'd have to go through and manually build them all. Here, it's just a couple clicks. And then these are drag and drop filters where if I've got that line chart and I say, well, what does that line chart look like for the prior quarter? I just drag this filter onto the line chart and it filters for the prior quarter. It will do the same thing for measures. So if we look at our revenue, this calculated measure that I built, if I go into properties, and again, I set the lookup reference to that, you'll see I can expand that, and now I've got all of my relative time measures, my prior month revenue, month-to-date revenue, same month last quarter revenue, just with a couple clicks. Yes? Yeah, so I mean, this is what you get out of the box. This is all editable. And actually, if you track down Rory Cornelius, he's a PM Square consultant who has done some editing of these things to create both custom calendars. Let's say your calendar runs August to July for whatever reason at your company. You can customize the calendars in here so that year-to-date follows your corporate calendar, not a fiscal calendar. Yep. Yeah. And so Rory can talk to you about that. There are instructions in the Cognos documentation. So okay, so it's 10:45. We're going to. Are there any questions about anything? I know I went over a ton of stuff really quickly. At some point, you probably were like, "Wait, what did you click on?" So I will of course go back and go over that after we take a couple questions and then a break. Okay. That's a great question. I have never unadded it, but I would imagine if you go to lookup reference and say none. Yep. Right, yeah, because you have invalid model references. So I mean, one thing about these is they can be a little touchy. Like if you delete something that is used in a reference, it will, Yeah. Now they do have, and actually, because we're demoing on 11.1.2, it's not available here, but in 11.1.3, they kind of redid the validate model features where there's, in the corner up here, there's a validate button, and then there's new like validate window that will appear that will show you every validation failure in the model. So that definitely helps in situations where suddenly your model's broken and you're not sure why. But like I said, that's only in 11.1.3, which came out 10 days ago or something, like maybe a couple weeks. Okay, there was another question over here. Yes? Like just automatically? No. No, you have to manually sort them. And you will find that sometimes you make changes that will unsort your manual sort. Yeah. Yeah. I would imagine it's on the roadmap. Yes. Great question. The question was, can we add object level security? So, not really object level security. The security that they do have, the way it's kind of data security. So if I were to look at Go Sales and maybe take the country, right, set data security, then I can add a security definition where I would say a particular group or role. Let's just grab a random one here. I don't know. Authors, right, have the following, can only see the following country codes. So you can do security on that level. Now, if you want to do the security, really what you're asking is, well, can I make it so that only certain users can see this table, or only certain users can see these fields in this table? That's on the roadmap. That's where the disclaimer statement from earlier came in, right? That's on the roadmap. It's not available in this release. Are there any other questions? If not, we'll take a brief break and go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, sure. So the question was, there are, on the properties, there are comments. What do those comments do? They do two things. So the first one would be, the comments are visible, like if you, let's say you're in dashboards and you look at this field and then you click on properties, you'll see the comments there. Now the screen tip will appear in any Cognos interface. So you'll see if I pop this in here, screen tip, right? Screen tip. So when I hover over these, it just gives me the name of the item. Like in this case, when I hover over this, you'll see that text that I typed in appears. So if you want to add comments, comments only appear when you view the properties of an object. A screen tip will appear if you hover over that object in any of the interfaces. So if you want to like send a message to your users about how to use a field, I would probably use the screen tip. Any other questions? Okay, so you're welcome to just start on the exercises now. We're going to take, from now until noon, essentially, is your time to go through the exercises. I will be here to answer questions. Sonia and Randy can answer questions. I will demonstrate stuff up on the screen periodically throughout as we get questions. If you there's a restroom. If you head, there's some doors, kind of a dark and spooky hallway right there. If you go down the dark and spooky hallway on the right, you will find the restrooms. And then are the refreshments available? Okay, and then at the back of the room, there's some refreshments as well. So feel free to do any of that. I will be up here and walk around the room. If you have any questions, let me know. I've spent the last 2 years going to every user group in the country saying, you guys, you got to use these data sets. They're so cool. And 2 years ago, nobody knew what I was talking about, even though it had been in the product for like a year. And now everybody knows, so cool. So kind of, you can import a framework manager model. Let me just pop open a model I built earlier. I'll just show this to you guys real quick, just as a tangent, just to show that it works, right? Here's an example of some pass-through SQL. Obviously, it's pretty simple, but You can build tables off of SQL and data modules, and they work. In any case, if I want to add something in from a framework manager package, I can go into add new sources and then find the package in the, wherever it is, in your public folders or your my folders. Let's grab Go Sales Query here. Choose OK. Now, you'll see that it added it in, and it added it in like it was a table. So what you can't do is you cannot choose, I only want to add table XYZ from a package to my data module, right? What you can do is, let's say there's some dimensions in this package that I want to use with this revenue fact. This revenue fact is actually a table that is built off, well, is it? No. In any case, what I can do is I can say, select these two, go create relationship, and now I'm basically going to define a join between that revenue table and a table in my package. So, right, here's the package, and maybe we grab, what's on this guy? Day of week, retailer site code. What in here has that information? Sales query. Yeah, retailers. I think the site code's going to be in here, right? Site. Retailer site. Maybe I should use the search. They put it in here for a reason. Retailer site code. So now I'm going to join retailer site code to retailer site code. I got my 1 to n. Everything looks good. I can still preview the data. And I'm going to choose OK. We'll just choose OK. Now I've got a join between the revenue table in my data module and the retailer table in my package. And now from there, I can go ahead, let me save this guy. And then we'll take a look at it. Clicky, clicky. There we go. Okay. So if you want to see, well, what does this look like in dashboards? I will preface this by saying I never do this. But it does work. So here you can see I can expand this, and I have access to that entire package. So I can think of situations where this would be useful. If I'm being honest, what I more typically do is exactly what you first suggested. I take the elements that I need, and I extract them from the package into a data set, and then I join the data set into my my data module. But you can do this as well. That was a good question. Thank you. Yeah, Randy. Okay. Okay, sure. Mm-hmm. Query speed? Yeah. Yep. Okay, great. So we will go through exactly that. So the way to create a data set, one of the reasons that nobody ever found these for years is because IBM hid them. It was like an Easter egg in Cognos. So, you can't click new data set. Why? I don't know. It seemed like they should have put it in there. Then people would have instantly found it. But the only way to get to it is to go to another model type. So a framework manager model or a data module. And then you click on the, I guess it's the action menu now. There we go. My question has been answered. It's now called the action menu. You click on the action menu. And then one of your options here is going to be create data set. So when I click on that, this is actually a reskinned version of report authoring is all this is. So all the stuff you know how to do in report authoring, you can, for the most part, do in here. If you really want to build a data set off of the full-blown report authoring, you can talk to Cognos Paul, and of course he will show you a Cognos Paul hack to make that work, right? That's like Paul's, that's the meaning of Paul's life, is to come up with crazy Cognos hacks. But just to show you how this works, I will grab I'm just going to grab some really simple information for this example. So if I'll just take year and product and then revenue. So you'll probably look at this and say, man, that kind of looks like a report. Again, it is a report. If I double click on any of these headers, you'll see that it opens the report authoring expression builder. So you can build logic into these. A lot of times people miss that too, that you can double click on it and open the expression editor. So if you think, well, I want to build a data set, but before I do that, I need to write this case statement, but I can't write a case statement in here. Well, you could write it right in here, right? Now, say this is all we need. And then I'm going to go ahead and go to save it. Now you'll see you have the options save as and save and load. I was told years ago, and I have been telling people to always do save as, because, and this came directly from Jason Tavaleris, who is the product manager in charge of this feature, that save and load is slower than saving it and then loading it through Cognos connection, right? I don't know if that's still true. I was told that a couple years ago. It may no longer be true, and I've just been repeating bad information, but that's the caveat for that. So if I go ahead and save this, all this is doing at this point, because I'm doing save as, right? And I'll save it into my content. All this is doing is really saving a report spec at this point. It's not loading any data. Now, if I go back to the Cognos UI, or the whatever they call this now, they got rid of all the names for everything, and they didn't come up with new ones. So now it's like, what is this? I don't know. The folders, like that's a lame name. In any case, here it is. Now, if you look at the properties to this, you will see, first of all, if I click on the action menu, you will see that refresh is one of the options here. So if I click this, it's going to then execute a query to populate the data set. And we'll get into what that means in a second. But an important or useful thing to know is that if you look at the properties, there's a couple of pieces of information you can glean, right? So the first one is, when was it built? Like, when was it created and when was it last modified, right? And then you can also see in here its size on disk, the number of rows, the number of columns, how long it takes to refresh, and who and when it was last refreshed. So if you need any of that information, this is where you find it. Let's go ahead and refresh it now. And this is probably going to refresh really quickly because it's small, but I'll talk through what's happening. So first thing you say, hey, it's being refreshed. Now right now it's executing a query to grab the data out of the database. In this case, it's a SQL Server database. It's going to take that data and it's going to load it into an Apache Parquet file, okay? So a Parquet file, yes? It's a good question. If you're on 11.0, it's using the query service. If you're on 11.1, there is a new service called the compute service. The compute service is a separate service that's dedicated towards this and a few other tasks, and it is actually a Spark SQL process. So one thing you'll notice is that IBM in general is gravitating towards using open source technology as the backbone for what it builds, right? So the days of we're going to build a proprietary SQL generation engine and it's going to have, we're going to make our own in-memory aggregate, like they're not doing that anymore. As time goes on, I expect the guts of Cognos are going to migrate more and more towards IBM's flavor of open source tech. Yes? if you go into the I think this is correct. We'll check in a second. I believe if you go into the advanced properties of the query service settings, you will find the compute service settings. So when it was doing that query, it was using that, it was fetching the data and loading it in. I should back up. I believe when it fetches that data, it's using the query service, right? So it's the same old query service to build the data set. And then when you run the data set, it's when it uses that Spark SQL engine. So at this point, what it did is it went ahead and it grabbed the data, it loaded it into that Apache Parquet file, and it put that Apache Parquet file into the Cognos content store. That's where it houses it. It doesn't query from the copy of the file that's in the content store. When an application server receives a query request that involves a data set, it checks to see if it has that data set. If it does have the data set, it checks the timestamp to see if there is a newer version available in the content store. If it doesn't have the data set, or the version in the content store has a more recent timestamp, it will first pull the data set out of the content store and put it on your application server in the data folder of your install directory, and then it will query it from there. You didn't know what you were asking, right? So in essence, that's how this works. And then when it's doing those queries, so it takes the data set, it's on the application server, and then it loads it up into the application server memory and uses that Spark SQL process to query the data set from within the memory of the application server that is processing the query. And that is why they are way, way, way faster than, in most cases, pulling the same data from your source system. Not always. No, you don't have to do anything. Now, if you are really determined that you cannot put the Parquet files in your content store, you do have the option to establish a location on disk where Cognos will store them instead. I have yet to really run into a reason why I thought that was necessary. Maybe if you have a gigantic content store and deleting the 17 years worth of PDFs that you have in there is not an option, then you would want to configure the disk storage instead. But I'm glad some people get my humor. But otherwise, I've always just let it go. I do tweak the settings of the various services so it has more memory. Yeah. On the query service? Yeah, that's a good number. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And that is one thing if you're still, is anybody in the room still on 10 in production? It's okay, don't feel bad. Okay. When you go to 11, for sure you will need more memory. And then if you're on one of the 11.0 releases and you go to 11.1, you will need more memory, probably, unless you've already, we can have a conversation about how much you have. But I recommend, as far as like your server memory, I start at 32 gigs and go up from there per application server. Because not only all of the new features use the query service, which is more memory intensive. Then you've got the new compute service, which is more memory intensive. If you're using data sets and you've got a data set, when we looked at the properties of the data set and we saw the size on disk, you got to figure whatever that number is, that is being loaded into the memory of your machine, right? So if you're going to have data sets that are, say you've got 10 data sets that are 1 gig, and they're going to be being used frequently, you're going to have 10 gigs worth of data sets loaded into the memory of that machine. So you need to have enough memory available to accommodate that. In addition, things like the new AI assistant, that uses more memory, just everything uses more memory. So sizing and, being honest, IBM hasn't really provided great messaging around that. So we've kind of, over the course of many Cognos 11 deployments, have come up with our own set of recommendations, and we can discuss that. But a lot of it to this day is, okay, you start, if I'm just building a brand new Cognos environment, I usually will try to start at 8 cores, 32 gigs of RAM, and go up from there as necessary. Did that answer your, okay. Yeah. And they definitely, I mean, as far as making things faster, this is, in my mind, like the #1 way to make things faster. When people say Cognos is slow, because here's the reality. The way Tableau works by default is off of data sets. And that's the reason people think Tableau is fast. I was one time working with a client. They had this huge amount of data, and we were trying to build a map off of it that had a bunch of points, and he was like, see, I'm doing this in dashboards, and it's so slow. I do it in Tableau, it's super fast. I mean, it was like millions and millions of rows, right? And I was like, oh, yeah, I don't, you know, well, we can try to add more memory, we can do X, Y, Z. And then I was talking to him later, and I see him open up the Tableau workbook, and the first thing it does is it locks his computer for 25 minutes while Tableau loads all that information up. And then it's blazingly fast. That's where the data sets come in. If he were doing the same thing, if he were forced to issue a live query to that underlying data every time he made a change, his Tableau experience would have been very poor. This is how you do that. You also had a question, how do I schedule these? There's 2 ways. The first way, you can schedule them really exactly like anything else. So if I go into the object here, and we say, look at the properties, you're going to see the Schedule tab. So you can set a schedule as if you were scheduling a report via the UI. All the same, it's exactly the same. The thing that I find most useful is by trigger. So say you've got an ETL that ends at 9 a.m., you would write a little file to submit to the Cognos server, the key phrase ETL complete, and then you would go ahead and schedule all of your data sets by trigger. So when ETL complete comes in, it will build all the data sets. Now, you maybe don't want to trigger 100 data set builds simultaneously, so you could, then you could maybe stagger, have a couple keywords that are submitted at different times or something like that. But that's one way to schedule them. The other way to schedule them is you can now, in the new extremely pretty, not extremely functional job scheduling interface, you can go ahead and there's the data set. So you can create jobs to run data sets just like you can reports or anything else. I'm not sure if you can trigger them in Event Studio. I haven't tried. What's that? Okay, so you would trigger the job in Event Studio. Yeah. And then, yeah, for those, how many people here use Event Studio? Okay. Yeah, it's really great. And it's on IBM's list of things, like they know they need to come up with a more modern version of Event Studio, and I think it just keeps not getting prioritized high enough in their development cycle. But yeah. Thank you, Nick. Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah, so that's a great question. Yeah, so the question is, when the data set gets refreshed every morning on our schedule, is it overwriting or is it appending? It's overwriting is what it's doing. You do not have the capability right now to tell it to append. I would imagine that is coming. And the reason that I feel confident that is coming is you can now, as of 11.1.3, when you upload an Excel file, it will ask you, do you want me to overwrite or append? And behind the scenes, an uploaded Excel file and a data set are the exact same thing. When you upload an Excel file and then you use it in dashboards, Cognos is not issuing a query to an XLSX, right? What it's doing is when you upload that Excel file, it reads in the data from the Excel file and then puts it in a Parquet file and puts the Parquet file in the content store and does everything that I just described. So given the fact that the Excel files now have the append versus replace capability, I think it's logical to assume that that will come to data sets. Fingers crossed. Yes, Randy.
When you develop this and you save your data set as you have in dev, and you're ready to move to prod,
Uh-huh.
or smart enough to move obviously the definition, but those Parquet files stay put or move?
It does not move the Parquet files. So if you're developing data sets in dev, and then you're deploying them to test and then QA and then prod, you have to rebuild them in each environment. One of the things, I will try not to get too soapboxy about this, because I know some of you have heard it from me before. But one of the things I tell people to do is like, just build these in prod, you know? Like, just build them in prod. I one time, so I went on to, does anybody here use Reddit? Okay, yeah, I know you do. So I'm the moderator of the Cognos subreddit, and I also I use Reddit for mostly Detroit Lions related stuff, but lots of other things too. And there's a reddit.com/r/business intelligence. It's a community of I think it's almost 30,000 people who just discuss BI. Now I would caution you against going there and talking too much about Cognos because it's not particularly popular right now. But I went on there and I asked people, well, what do you do? How do you handle this? Because I kind of am known there, so they know I'm a Cognos consultant. And I was like, okay, so how do you handle like people doing stuff in dev versus QA versus prod on Tableau Enterprise Server? And they were like, there's no dev on Tableau Enterprise Server. Everything is prod. There's a folder that is hidden from the users, and that's where they do their development. And they don't have another environment. They have a DR. If the Tableau Enterprise Server crashes, they have a backup environment that will fire up. But they do not have a dev environment where everyone is required to do their development, and then they just have a folder. So now I know that I say this frequently, and about half the room is like, yes, and the other half of the room thinks I'm insane. So it is what it is. But, you know, if you were to ask yourself, well, why has Tableau or Power BI caught on so much? There are a number of reasons, but one of them would be that both the end users and the developers are developing in prod, on prod data, so that they can, it just makes everything faster. When you're developing on prod data, we've all had the experience where we make a report or dashboard, we show it to the end user, and all they can see is this data is from 2017. That's it. They can't, that's all they can see, especially if any of you develop reports for finance. It's especially serious there, right? All they can see are the numbers. And you're like, no. It's like, are the prompts right? Is this the chart you want? And they're like, but why is that calc wrong? So if you develop in prod on prod data, you short circuit that whole process. I'll get off the soapbox now. Those are all very good questions. Thank you. Anything else? So the number one thing I think that would cause a data set to fail to refresh is there's been a change in the model that it was built on that hasn't been reflected in the data set. If that's not the case, that's almost always the case. If that's not the case, then the next place I would look would be, is there, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So it was mixed data types sometimes, or occasionally nulls. The first. Yeah.
Like we have a data set that has 3.5 million records that gets updated once
Okay.
8 times out.
Yeah.
Down to about 500,000, it runs without any problem.
Yeah. And that's on the load.
That's on the refresh.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm not sure if there's a default timeout on them. I imagine there is somewhere. I can look into that. Yeah, that one I'm not sure. That's a good question though. The first thing I would assume is like, if it fails to run instantly, like right away, then I would say look if something changed in your model. If it's executing for a while and then dying, I would look at that. I would also look at like, is it consuming all of the available? Sometimes when it consumes all the available memory, it'll crash. I'm assuming because everything else in Cognos acts that way. So no. So it's only going to consume it on the dispatcher that is processing the request. Now, so there's a good question. And I actually haven't looked into it, but I'm going to now, is like, well, can I tell it where I want it to build the data set? How does it choose which dispatcher or app server to use to build the data set? That I'm not sure. Like if you schedule it, obviously if you've got a session open to dispatcher A and you refresh it via the UI, it's going to process on dispatcher A, right? But if it's just triggering, yeah, I would think. I'm not sure how it chooses where to. I'm going to write that down. That's a good question. Right. Yeah, because I don't think they have. I don't know if a data set would inherit the routing rules from a model, and I don't think you can set them in here. Honestly, I've never tried. Okay. Yeah, I would expect it to be in there. Okay, I'll data set build routing. So I'm going to take all the questions I can answer, and I'll email Jason at IBM and see what he has to say. Okay, so we got 2 minutes left in this session. What other questions do you guys have? It doesn't, yeah. We haven't discussed it, so yes. Yeah, you can, the question was, are we going to leave this site available for people to play with? So yeah, we'll leave it up. It's always up. It's just we will eventually turn the security back on, so you'll be required to log in at that point.